The city of Ironvale had seen its fair share of legendary games, but none carried the kind of quiet unease that clung to the night of February 14th. It wasn't the playoffs, not even a finals match, just a regular season clash between the Ironvale Titans and the Crestwood Vultures. But the atmosphere in the arena felt different, almost manufactured. Fans filtered into the Hardwood Coliseum with the usual sea of jerseys and painted faces. But underneath the laughter and chants, there was a silence between the sounds, like a hum no one could quite place. Whispers floated through the concourse, stories that ticket scalpers and security guards had been repeating since morning. This game, they said, isn't going to be what it looks like. The Titans had been favorites all year, a team built on grit and chemistry. They played like brothers, and in Ironvale that meant something. But when players arrived that night, some noticed things that felt out of step with routine. The referees, usually indifferent and stiff, exchanged too many hushed words with the Vultures' assistant coach. The betting lines had shifted in odd directions, with strange amounts of money suddenly flowing in from anonymous accounts. Even the locker room felt colder than usual, the fluorescent lights flickering like warning signals. A veteran forward for the Titans, Marcus Hale, remembered later that he couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was pulling the strings before the ball had even been tossed. Outside, reporters huddled together, not in their usual gossip about player trades or injuries, but about the unusual security presence. More guards than usual stood at the entrances, their radios buzzing with coded chatter. And the crowd, normally a buzzing swarm of anticipation, seemed split, as if some fans already knew what they were about to witness and others were blissfully unaware. It was as though two parallel realities had collided in the same space. One built on basketball as a game of passion, and another where the sport was nothing more than a stage for something much darker. As the players lined up in the tunnel, the rookie guard, Darius Cole, leaned toward Marcus Hale and whispered, "Something's wrong tonight." Hale tried to shake it off to focus on the game, but he couldn't. He looked around and noticed too many faces he didn't recognize among the arena staff, too many cameras positioned at odd angles. The hardwood court itself gleamed under the spotlights, but instead of promise, it looked like a stage prepared for an elaborate trick. And when the PA announcer's voice boomed through the stadium, introducing the lineups, the cheer that followed felt scripted, hollow. The Titans jogged out to the roar of their home crowd, but beneath the applause was a chill that every player felt, though none could name. On that night, the game had already been decided before the first whistle. The only question left was, who had written the script? From the opening tip, the game unfolded like a theater piece, every movement sharp yet somehow unnatural, as if invisible wires controlled the players' limbs. The ball sailed into the air, and the Titans' center, usually a dominant force on the jump, mistimed his leap, allowing the Vultures' big man to secure possession with ease. The crowd brushed it off as nerves, but those watching closely could see his eyes, unfocused, almost distracted, as though he wasn't playing to win but playing a role. The first quarter carried an eerie rhythm. The referee's whistles pierced the air with uncanny timing, always favoring the Vultures. A clean block by Marcus Hale was called a foul. A clear charge by Crestwood's star guard was ignored. The scoreboard ticked forward not through skill but through a steady stream of free throws, each one stretching the silence in the stands a little longer. The fans grew restless, their chants turning into boos, but the officials remained stone-faced, unmoved, as if they'd been rehearsing this very script. What unsettled the players most were the subtle signals passed between referees and the Vultures' bench. A glance, a tug at the collar, a quick brush of the wrist, small gestures that carried outsized consequences. Each time one was exchanged, a call followed seconds later, always shifting momentum in Crestwood's favor. On the sidelines, Coach Ramirez of the Titans screamed until his voice cracked, demanding explanations, but his protests bounced off the blank stares of officials who refused to meet his eyes. By halftime, the Vultures held a lead that didn't make sense on paper. They hadn't outshot, outrun, or outplayed the Titans, yet the scoreboard insisted they were in control. Players sat in the locker room, towels draped over their heads, muttering about how the game didn't feel real. Darius Cole, the rookie, slammed his fists against his locker, swearing he saw one referee wink toward the Vultures bench after a phantom foul call. Marcus Hale tried to calm him, but deep down, he shared the same fear. The outcome of this game was never meant to come from their hands. Back on the court, the second half deepened the strangeness. The Titans mounted brief rallies, flashes of their usual brilliance. Fast breaks, sharp three-pointers, defensive stands. But each time momentum swelled, something crushed it. A whistle, a turnover that seemed forced, a timeout called at the oddest possible moment. The energy of the game was being siphoned, redirected, until the players felt like puppets dancing for an audience they didn't fully understand. The crowd, once electric, now pulsed with agitation. Boos rained down louder, objects hurled toward the floor. Security swarmed the aisles, their presence heavy, almost menacing, as if they weren't there to protect the players but to control the spectators. The entire arena felt trapped inside an invisible net, tension tightening with every possession. And yet, amid the chaos, certain fans seemed unfazed. Scattered through the seats were individuals who didn't cheer, didn't boo, didn't even react. They simply watched, calm and expressionless, as if the game was unfolding exactly as expected. For the Titans, the realization grew too loud to ignore. This wasn't just a bad night of officiating. It was something orchestrated, a performance where the true audience wasn't the screaming crowd but the silent watchers hidden in plain sight. The buzzer sounded to end the third quarter, but instead of anticipation, the arena sat in uneasy quiet. It wasn't about who would win anymore. It was about how deep the illusion went, and whether anyone on the court had the power to break it. The fourth quarter opened not with excitement, but with a suffocating sense of inevitability. The hardwood gleamed under the lights, yet every squeak of sneakers and echo of the ball felt hollow, as if the game had already slipped into something beyond basketball. Players exchanged glances, searching for confirmation of their shared suspicion. This wasn't competition anymore. It was choreography. Each possession seemed mapped in advance, each whistle timed like cues in a script only a select few understood. Then came the signals. Not subtle this time, but brazen. A Vulture's guard dribbled near the sideline and, while glancing toward the scorer's table, brushed his hand across his neck. Seconds later, a Titans fast break was blown dead with an offensive foul call no one could believe. The crowd erupted in outrage, but those watching carefully, Marcus Hale among them, noticed the pattern. The gestures weren't random. A tug at the earlobe, a tap to the forearm, a glance toward the rafters. Each one preceded a call that shifted momentum, always in the same direction. It was like watching a secret language unfold in real time, a code that dictated who would rise and who would fall. On the bench, Coach Ramirez scribbled frantically on a notepad, circling moments, underlining times, whispering to his assistants. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence mounted with every possession. "They're not calling the game," he muttered under his breath. "They're controlling it." Darius Cole, the rookie, leaned forward, eyes burning, demanding to be subbed back in. But even his youthful fire seemed powerless against the invisible hands steering the contest. The fans, too, began to sense it. Their chants grew less like support and more like protest. Smoke from concession stands and flares in the upper rows drifted into the arena, curling through the spotlights like ghostly warnings. The haze gave the court a dreamlike quality, as if the game itself was being swallowed into something otherworldly. Through the smoke, the silent watchers in the crowd, the ones who hadn't cheered all night, remained still, almost statuesque, their gazes fixed on the court with unnerving patience. And then came the breaking point. With 2 minutes left, Marcus Hale drove hard to the basket, absorbed contact, and finished a layup that should have cut the deficit to a single possession. The crowd exploded, finally believing the Titans had clawed their way back. But before the ball even touched the floor, a whistle shrieked. Offensive foul. Basket waved off. The referee, expressionless, signaled the call with mechanical precision. Hale stood frozen under the rim, his chest heaving, as if the air itself had betrayed him. Around him, the chants of the crowd dissolved into chaos. Cups hurled onto the floor, fans screaming, smoke thickening until visibility blurred. The Titans gathered at mid-court, coughing through the haze, their faces etched with disbelief. It was no longer just about losing. It was about survival inside an arena that felt on the verge of unraveling. The signals, the smoke, the silence of the watchers. It all pointed toward a truth darker than the scoreboard could ever reveal. And as the final minute ticked closer, the players realized the game wasn't being stolen. It had never been theirs to begin with. The final minute should have been a battle of heart and hustle, the kind of closing stretch that defined legends. Instead, it felt like the unraveling of something sacred. The Titans, down by 6, scrambled to mount one last rally, but every dribble carried the weight of inevitability. Their shots clanged off the rim, their passes slipped like butter through their fingers, as though the game itself was rejecting their effort. And when the Vultures extended the lead with yet another trip to the free throw line, the sound of the whistle became unbearable. No longer a part of the game, but a weapon wielded with cruel precision. The crowd erupted into chaos. Boos morphed into roars of rage. Fans pounded on the glass behind the scorer's table, shouting accusations of corruption. Security forces swarmed the aisles, but instead of calming the storm, they seemed to fuel it. Their presence more like wardens keeping prisoners in line than guardians of a sporting event. Smoke from flares and scattered popcorn fires hung thick in the rafters, swirling in the glow of the arena lights until the entire Coliseum resembled a stage consumed by shadows. On the court, the Titans broke down. Marcus Hale, the anchor of the team, shouted at referees until his voice shredded into hoarse gasps. Darius Cole, the rookie, sat on the bench with his head buried in his hands, whispering over and over, "It's all rigged. It's all rigged." The younger players stared at their coach, hoping for answers, but Ramirez looked hollow, his notepad trembling in his hands, as if he'd realized that proof meant nothing against power that couldn't be named aloud. The game wasn't slipping away. It had been stolen in plain sight, and no one with authority cared enough to stop it. What hurt more than the loss was the fracture of trust. Basketball in Ironvale had always been more than sport. It was identity, a bond between the players and the people who filled those seats night after night. But as the scoreboard ticked down to zeros, that bond cracked. Fans hurled bottles, chairs, even their own jerseys onto the hardwood, not in anger at the Titans, but in despair at the betrayal of the game itself. The court that had once been a sanctuary became a crime scene, not of blood and violence, but of manipulation and deceit. When the final buzzer sounded, it didn't feel like an ending, it felt like a sentence. The Vultures celebrated awkwardly, almost reluctantly, their faces betraying the knowledge that their victory was hollow. The referees walked briskly off the floor, avoiding eye contact, while the silent watchers in the crowd finally rose, slipping quietly into the smoke-filled exits without a word. The Titans stood motionless, not defeated by an opponent, but by an unseen hand that had turned their passion into theater. And as the chaos spilled into the streets outside, the question echoed louder than the boos. If the game could be scripted once, how many times had it already happened? How many moments fans believed were pure had been illusions, carefully orchestrated behind closed doors? The league would release statements, the referees would vanish into reassignment, and officials would insist nothing unusual had taken place. But those who were there that night in Ironvale knew the truth. The collapse of trust had begun, and it would never be fully repaired. The arena emptied into a city that felt different than it had when the Titans arrived. Streetlights flickered over damp pavement, casting long, distorted shadows as fans wandered home in stunned silence. Their voices hushed as if speaking too loudly might summon the game back into the air. News crews scrambled to capture reactions, but even their cameras seemed to fail at catching the full scope of what had happened. The story was larger than statistics, bigger than a loss on the scoreboard. It was a wound, an event that would linger like smoke in the lungs of Ironvale for years to come. Inside the locker rooms, the Titans nursed bruised egos and shattered faith. Marcus Hale sat alone, towels draped over his shoulders, staring at the wall as if the hardwood itself had betrayed him. Darius Cole traced the lines of the court in his mind, replaying every whistle, every gesture, every subtle flicker of the Vulture's celebration that had signaled control. Coach Ramirez spoke little, the words he might have offered rendered meaningless by the sheer absurdity of what had unfolded. Trust had crumbled, not just in the officials, not just in the league, but in the very idea that the game could ever be pure again. The Vultures, meanwhile, were hailed in headlines as victors, but even their triumph carried a hollow echo. Among the players, uneasy glances replaced celebration. They had won, yes, but at what cost? The scripted plays, the orchestrated calls, the invisible choreography. These had stolen authenticity from every moment, leaving a victory that felt more like a performance than a conquest. Some celebrated in private, but none could escape the nagging thought that they were now complicit in a deception far larger than themselves. Months later, the game remained a ghost in the collective memory of the league. Fans debated, dissected, and theorized, but the truth, if it could ever be uncovered, remained hidden in the whispers, the gestures, the coded signals that had directed every move that night. The Titans returned to the court, but with each game, a shadow followed them, a reminder that behind the dazzling spectacle of basketball lay the unsettling possibility of manipulation, of control, of games played not for passion but for unseen purposes. And so, Ironvale carried on, unaware in the daylight what had occurred under the bright lights of the Hardwood Coliseum. The players continued to fight, the fans continued to cheer, and the referees continued to officiate, but the echo of that night lingered, a haunting, unspoken presence that reminded everyone, if only in a fleeting glance at the scoreboard or a tense pause in the crowd, that not every victory is earned, and not every game is fair. For in the end, some nights are remembered not for the final score, but for the shadows they leave behind, stretching long and silent across the hardwood, whispering a single chilling truth. The game may be played, but it is never truly free.